Fasten your seatbelt. Get ready for a real spiritual journey. I'm Pastor Natouchka Voigt. Welcome to Let's Have the Conversation.
One child, one family.
I'm delighted to be here because this broadcast is about biblically relatable events in our lives. Sometimes we read the Bible, though essential, we need to be able to understand and it be relatable. For teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. On this broadcast, you'll learn about all the essentials to a well-balanced life, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, relationally, financially, professionally, and personally. Welcome to Let's Have the Conversation. Thank you, everyone, for joining the broadcast. I'm Pastor Natouchka Voigt. Thank you for joining us on Let's Have the Conversation. I have a special guest this evening, Karlesha Hewitt, who's going to share her testimony, her story, her walk, how she shares the gospel, share her family, and how she continues to do the things that God has put on her heart. Hi, how are you, Karlesha? Thank you for joining us.
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to sharing.
I'm excited because I have learned so much about you and watched some of the wonderful and amazing things that you've done. I wanted the audience to get an understanding how you serve the Lord. So can you tell us a little bit about you?
Sorry, look at me. I'm having an airing malfunction.
Okay. We keep it real here.
Hey, it happens. So my walk with the Lord, so I wasn't raised in church. I sort of, resent kind of starting the story that way, but I think that really helps people to understand that, I wasn't steeped in church culture or understanding of who God was necessarily when I was growing up. So I went to church up until about the third grade when I was 8 years old. And then we stopped going, my family. And then I didn't start going to church again until I was saved, really, at 23 years old, just choosing to go on my own. So, and my journey to Christ is really that, my mother had been saved in her adult life as well. So she was saved in 2010 when she was 42 years old. And so while I was in college, I got to watch her, right, just grow with her relationship with Christ, find a church home, commit to serving there and building those kind of relationships. And over that time period, I definitely was able to watch her change, her personality, her values, her perception of the world, right? And meanwhile, I'm in college, right? So I'm living my life. I'm kind of watching mom from the sidelines and saying, oh, that's cute. She's all into God now, that's nice,
Right.
But I was doing my own thing, and then 3 years later, when it came time to get into law school, the summer before law school, I had something happen where I almost didn't get to go to law school because I couldn't get a loan released to me. And so what happened was my the Grad Plus loan that I needed wouldn't come through because I had a repossession on my credit.
Okay.
And the way that I got that repossession was I co-signed for someone. So guys, heads up to the listeners, don't co-sign for anyone ever.
Right.
So I co-signed for someone. They end up getting repossession, and that repossession stayed on my credit. And so I couldn't get the Grad Plus loan to go. That same season of life, though, my mom ended up losing her job, which she was working at for like 13 or 15 years.
Okay.
She got a severance package, and she ultimately ended up giving me about $17,000 to settle the debt on my credit so that I could get that loan release. So thank God, that what could be a horrible experience, right? Losing your job after 13, 15 years. It was such a blessing for me and my future because we wouldn't have had access to that kind of money to settle the debt otherwise. And so that summer, just seeing that come to fruition really just caused me to really call out to God for help, right? Before that happened, it was looking like a desperate situation. It was looking like you're not going to go to law school. And I had no plan B. That's what I wanted to do since I was 5 years old. So there was no, what else is there after law school? There was nothing else. There was no other option. And I had fallen to a dark place, you know, that summer because I didn't know what to do. You know, I didn't have that kind of money to settle the debt and get the loan. And so by God's grace and just him being the great orchestrator of all things, sovereign over debt too, right? He made it so that there was a way through to the next, right? And so,
He always
yeah, I
does
grew
that,
closer
right?
to God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew closer to God that summer. Still didn't get saved though. I was just curious now, and I had proof. To me, what I called proof of his sovereignty in my life, right?
Right.
So I went off to law school, start going to law school, and the first internship I do at the end of my first year in 2013, I went to DC, District of Columbia. I had never been there in my life. I lived there for 3 months, working 35 hours a week, right, as a part of my internship program with my law school. And I began to go to a church there, St. Paul AME, and down there in DC. And I went to the Bible studies, and so much was poured into me, so much information about this Bible, this God, Jesus.
Right.
And I remember there was this question that they would ask at the end of every service, which is, you know, are you saved? Right? Do you want to give your life to Christ? Are you saved? Something like that. You know, there's a question that they always ask at the end. And I started to ask myself, what does that even mean? I had no idea. I had no idea what it meant. I kept thinking about it. Every time they would say it, I'm like, maybe I'm not, because I don't even know what it means. But I didn't want to walk up there, you know? So I had it in my mind, and I'm like, am I saved? I don't know what that means. So one day in Bible study, I finally built up the courage to ask. Her name was Reverend Evan Constance, I remember. Very sweet, older woman. Her son was the pastor. She was phenomenal. And there would be days where it would just be me and her in the Bible study, and she would just pour. I mean, take time. Just God gave her to me in that season of my life. And I asked her one Bible study, I'm like, what does it mean? Like, when you guys are asking this question about being saved, like, how do you know? How do you know if you're saved, you know? And so she kind of explained it to me in her own way. And I can't tell you what she told me back then, but all I remember is thinking when I left, do I want to be, you know, like based on what she described to me. And so I thought about it some more. A couple more Sundays went by, and it ended up being my second to last. I want to say it was my second to last Sunday with them before I was supposed to move back to Massachusetts to continue school, law school. So they say it, right? And in my spirit, now what I know to be the Holy Spirit, I didn't know back then. I felt that strong urge to walk up there, right? But I was fighting it in my head. I was like, I'm not going up there. No, what do you mean? I'm not going up there, because I was really thinking about it and wrestling. Right. And somehow, and I don't mean to over spiritualize it, but somehow I ended up there. Wow. Right? Despite my logic saying, don't go up there, girl. You don't need to be up there. Right. So I go up there. I do the declaration. I declare that Jesus is Lord over my life. And at the time, I repeated after the pastor. So I said, I believe in my heart that Jesus saved me and rose from the dead, and you know, therefore I'm saved and all of that. But when I had driven off, I never forgot this till this day, 7 years later. My mom, when I called her, she cried. She was so happy. She was mad that I wasn't saved in front of her, because she always wanted to be there, right, when it happened to me. She's like, man, you know, you wait till you get to DC. But she was so happy. And she said to me, get ready. You are about to be attacked. And all I could think of was, what? I'm like celebrating. I'm thinking this is a good thing. And she's telling me the devil is about to attack you. You need to get ready, right? And I don't know what it means back then. I'm just scared, because now I'm like, well, geez, maybe I made the wrong decision, you know? But it was so true, you know, like before he didn't have anything to attack because I belonged to him. Right. Right.
You know, it's not to cut you off. It is amazing that your mother said that, because, you know, you're not told this when you're considering it. And it's, I am going to remember what you just said about what does that mean to be saved? You know, when you do the altar call, you call people, you don't think that they don't know, you know? And I remember when I was saved, after getting saved, I did fall under attack. So when I'm in church and I see people go up and give their life, I'm always saying a separate prayer, give them what they need to make it. Yeah, because your mother was 100% right when she said that. There is an attack that comes. But please continue to share
No, that's it. That's the start of everything, right?
Right.
2013, November 13th, I want to say November 13th or 11th, 2013, that Sunday. That was the day I was saved.
Wow.
I would say though, and this is a whole nother conversation, but I would say that that was the day I said the declaration, right? That piece.
Yes.
I don't necessarily believe that I was saved in my heart that day,
Okay.
because I didn't really understand who Jesus was, right? At that time in my life, it had just been taught to me that Jesus and God are the same person, right? Are
Right.
the same thing. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. Nobody
Right.
ever told me that, right? So I began on that journey of kind of trying to understand and pursuing after the things of God. And it took time. I don't mean to say I hit the ground running. And when I went back to Massachusetts, all of the familiar things that I had left behind and gotten saved in DC didn't come back up, right? I still had the same boyfriend I had left to go intern and had to deal with that, right? I had to
Right.
deal with the struggles of law school, now having this new understanding of who God said I am and having to learn to believe it. Right? It's this
Right.
whole process. It takes time, it takes years, it takes lifetime. You're never there. There is no there, right? There's always just more God to understand and to
Yeah.
know. But in those early stages in 2013, because of God's promise, I was saved, right? But I
Right.
didn't know it. I didn't really know it
Right.
back then.
It's I so appreciate your honesty because it it you it gives you a clearer picture of what every different people might be experiencing in the process. You may say you're struggling to go up and something leads you up there. You're not 100% sure if you're really there, but in a sense, you're still covered by him as you're getting to the one or two steps, I call it, because we haven't fully arrived. We won't arrive until we see him again, but you're so transparent with what happens because people go through something in that process. And sometimes they're not always given a platform to share that. But when you are given it, I think it's comforting to people to know that, oh, it's okay what I'm experiencing, struggling to get up there,
Right.
So it's amazing what you just said, and I will always be mindful myself when someone, says the sinner's prayer, gives their life to the Lord, to be mindful of what it took to get up here
Right.
and
Never know.
understanding what it's going to take to keep going. It doesn't just end with giving your life. It's a whole process. But
That's right. It's the
so
start. It's the start of life,
it's the
right?
start. It is the
Right.
start. Yeah. Yeah.
Second Corinthians 5:7. Therefore, the old things have gone, the new things are here, the new
Yes.
creature. It is
Yes.
a birth. It is a birthing
Yeah.
process.
It is.
So like you're
It's not that
celebrating.
one day. It's
That's right.
the whole process, and it needs to be made clear. I'm very grateful after when people give their life later on, they meet with someone in the church and they explain it to them, but it's still something you have to digest slowly. you
Yes.
know. So you have many, 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 many gifts and talents, many, and it's amazing to see
Yeah.
them. Can you tell us about the gifts and talents that you have and, knowing that God gave them to you, but tell us about it, please.
Sure thing. So you know me best, I think, as a faith-based spoken word poet,
Yes,
right? Just because a
yes,
lot of people seem to know me that way these days. I've also been blessed with the gift of writing, right? Of editing. I do some editing, copywriting, which is really just the creation of words for people, whether it be websites, emails, etc., whatever people need help with. Speaking. I'm an attorney, so I'm also taught that way. I was able to hone it in my career. But I
okay,
think God gave the ability to me to convey information, hopefully with simplicity. So yeah, I think when it comes to speaking, I like to tell people the story because when I was younger, and even not even when I was younger, when I was in law school, all the way up until, right,
yeah,
I had social anxieties. It was difficult for me to share myself, right, out loud. And certain crowds, I would be very talkative when I was comfortable. but also for a little while in my life, I was quiet. I was my mom's little quiet, shy kid. Like I would cry when there was loud music when I was a kid. That's how weird I was. I didn't like noise, right? And then fast forward, like my teenage years, I end up writing songs, writing music, writing poetry. I've been writing poetry since I was like 10 years old that I know of, probably before then. But the earliest poem I actually have is from when I was 10 years old.
Wow.
And I've been writing and writing and, you know, always been an expressive person. And then, you know, I ended up performing my first poetry performance in college, actually, which took so much because I literally was nervous. Like I wasn't confident in myself. You know what I mean? And it's interesting when I tell people now, like I have social anxieties, like I've overcome it just recently. Like sometimes it still stirs itself up. And then now in my professional life, it reflects as like a imposter syndrome. You know, you kind of don't feel like you fit in and you don't feel like you belong. And then I have to remember who God made me and that he put me where I am. So I must belong, you know, all that good stuff. But ultimately, I know God gave this stuff to me because it's not taught. I wasn't raised to be a writer, right, necessarily. Right. My mom was a very expressive person. She was a journaler, an encourager. You know, she always had the nuggets, right? Like she always came up with the quick nuggets that were like jam-packed with wisdom and knowledge and encouragement. But she also wasn't taught. It was just in her, right? Yeah. And that's the blessing of God, is that I feel like a lot of people in my family, our gifts are connected in that way, where we all have the writing ability or the speaking ability, the presentation ability, the encouragement ability. So all of that kind of shows up in the various different areas of my life, in career, in my hobbies, in my side hustles. It all comes back to glorifying God in some way, shape, or form, encouraging people, and really making sure people understand how accessible information is, God is, right? Like not making it so far out of reach. So like you complimented me earlier on the transparency. I think for me, that really helped me early on in my faith walk. And so I would call that a gift. It is a gift to be so boldly transparent, right? Yeah,
I think sometimes people, you know how the Bible explains that God knew us before we were in our mother's womb. So he had a plan laid out for us. And I think sometimes people don't always realize you have multiple gifts. It's not just the career that you have. You know, we have a multi-purpose God. So he's, you know, he laid out multiple things in us that would all come together to serve his purpose. Mm-hmm. And you talked about your poetry, which, yeah, I do know you from the spoken word, and you know, and I've seen some of your mother's things that she's written that have touched my life, and you're an attorney. And you kind of answered the question, how do you put your talents to work? You really put them to work. So,
amen.
And
literally, figuratively, spiritually.
You have to make use of everything that we have. You know, once we identify what we have, we need to put it to work, you know, and it's so essential because the kingdom gave you those things to use it to multiply. Would you say that you've used your gifts to do those things?
So that's my goal, right? I would say yes, for sure, when it comes to certain of my gifts. I think I'm just now coming into a season, specifically with COVID and quarantining and all of that, and having lost my mother, which I'm sure we'll talk about, you know, this idea that whatever God planted in me, whatever seeds he put in me, before I die, I want to make sure there's some evidence of it out here, right? I don't want it to die in here, like, because then he gave it to me for nothing, right? To your point, we are for other people, right? I was not born into this world solely for Karlesha's life, to live my life, to have a successful life by myself in my own little bubble, where my family is the only people directly impacted by my successes, my positive attributes, and then die. I don't believe that, right? I think God appoints people to learn from us, to be encouraged by us, to learn him from us. Different parts of us are always for somebody. And so we do ourselves a disservice, we do God a disservice, we do those people a disservice if we keep them to ourselves, if we hoard them, or if we're so shy and crippled by our own non-belief of who God said we are, right? Then they lose out and we lose out, because I've grown from putting my gifts out into the atmosphere. I've been able to connect with certain people I would have never been able to connect with had I not, despite my nervousness, because it's not as though I'm ever afraid.
Right.
It's just like, you know, when I watch my mom just kind of, whatever she had in her to do, she would just pursue, right? It was like, okay, God, this is what you want me to do? We're doing it, right? And it would work. And it's because God gave it to her, right? I don't think it would work. You know, it's not things, all things are not without struggle, but I honestly don't think things flourish and bear good fruit, right? As scripture said, I have it, John 15:78, right? You'll bear much fruit. I don't think that if you are not abiding in God and he abiding in you, and therefore you get the much fruit because of that, that it wouldn't grow if God didn't have his hand on it, right? So for me now, the poetry thing, God has so far this season alone, I'm telling you, has taken my poetry just somewhere totally different that I wasn't expecting it to go, right? Where it's caused me to have this connection with other faith-based poets. I'm now in ministries where the goal is, it's so much bigger than the poetry. It's about transformation. It's about impacting lives. It's about ministering to people by way of the arts, right? So much bigger than us. And then this gift, right? That just, to some, is just used as a gift, or just used for attention or for the clout of it, you know, to say, oh, you know, this many people saw this many people heard this. I'm more concerned with the DM conversations I have after I post things, because they're so powerful. Like people from all over the world can relate to this little minute issue impacting believers, right? That's what this is about. It's about the interactions after. That's the real ministry, right? But the beauty in the art, for me, God allowed me with the poetry before COVID, it would allow me to invite myself into and be invited into rooms that Christians aren't usually welcome, right? Because those people might feel condemned or judged, but everybody loves art. Everybody loves poetry. So even though I'm saying things and I have scriptures in my performances, and I'm talking about God and his expectations, and really there is some convicting pieces I have, right? I have such interesting conversations after the fact. And honestly, it's because God is God, right? Like we do the planting, he does the watering, right? So I can water with my gifts. And I'm using my poetry as an example, but this can take place with editing. It can take place with speaking, being interviewed even, right? Like any gift that he gave me, any ability, it is water, it is planting. This is what we're doing. We're just planting the seed, right? And praying that, you know, the Holy Spirit will do what he does. You know, we don't really have to, it's not our job to kind of monitor how's that plant growing. How you doing? Did you learn what I told you last year, last week, last month, last second? That is not our job.
Not at all.
That, you know, because I think that's something Christians sometimes, we sort of take on the role of God in that way, and it's not what he called us to do, right? Like he just called us to edify him. Like, if he be lifted up, then he'll draw them, right? We don't have to do the drawing, right? So and
you know, it's so true, and we're not built for that. You know, he's built for it, you know. And you know, while you were talking about your poetry, believe it or not, it's a form of therapy for people, you know.
Me too.
It is a form of therapy. There are different, you know, even though I went to school for psychology, I learned the formal way to do counseling, but there is so many different ways, therapeutic ways to reach people. And this is one of them. And we know our Father in general is the master counselor, the wonderful counselor, you know, so it's amazing when you share that. And, you know, for myself, just watching you and watching how you're evolving and the gifts. I have a few young women your age that I've watched, you know, a few daughters here and there that I've been so blessed to watch them evolve in their ministries, and just the boldness and the courage to go forth and bring ministry. You know, it's not the traditional way that people would have it, but is it really the way that God would have it? He's a multi-purpose God, multi-talent that he gives us to go out and reach people in different forums, meet them at their real, meet them at their need, and, you know, bring forth the message and their lives be transformed. You know, I personally had an experience with you that has so much impact my life. And that was financial. I mean, two ways. Your mother, and we'll get to your mother, this phenomenal woman, but you impact my life financially by sharing your story. And there's a lot of people who have this idea about money, finances.
Yeah.
And I was on Facebook and I saw something that you shared. I was wondering, I'm not going to take from your story. I'm not going to tell your story. I'm going to let you give your story. And
That's all
about
right.
your financial experience. What advice would you give to people who are struggling financially?
All right. So your two questions, right?
Yes.
The first question was, back in April of this year, 2020, I was able to pay off a little over $58,000 after a 2-year period of just grinding it out and following a plan that I was exposed to, a Dave Ramsey plan. That's a person. Dave Ramsey has podcasts. He's a New York Times bestseller. He's got classes throughout churches all across the U.S. And I learned so much, and that was life-changing for me, right? Just having that information changed everything for me, and has consistently and forever changed the way I view money, changed the way I view my future, what I want to do with my money, etc. Right? And so to answer your question now, that's the first thing: acknowledgement. I'm not doing this right, or I could be doing this better, right? And then go and pursue the other information. People out there have written books. Some people are talking about it for free on podcasts. You never have to spend a dime if you don't want to. It's just free information. YouTube, talking to friends, just having a shamelessness about finances, because this world, we're not talking to each other enough. But if you read the statistics about money, it's like the overwhelming majority of people in this country are living paycheck to paycheck, not just brown people, right? All of us, 6-figure earners, all of us. And so, but if you don't talk to people, or if you don't read those stats, you're out here thinking, oh, it's just me, I can't tell anybody, right? So just get the information. And then once you get the information, apply it, buckle down. It takes sacrifice, right? Because what I did to pay off that amount of money, it wasn't some get rich quick scheme. It didn't happen overnight. It was discipline. It was sacrifice. It was tears. It was a lot of saying no to myself, which is hard for everybody to do, right?
Right.
And so it's just, it was a different lifestyle, but I had to choose it, right? And I liken it to the boundaries set for us by God with Christianity, right? Once we know the truth of God, which is that he wants what's best for us, that he's good and that he's always good.
Yes.
Even though the boundaries might be contrary to culture, might not seem popular, might be uncomfortable for us, once you know who set the boundaries, it's so easy to follow it, right? So likewise, if you learn a new financial strategy, you gain exposure to that new information, and you know the person giving you that information, it worked for them, right? You have no reason to doubt it, right? You see the evidence, it works, right? You would be a fool not to follow it, even through the pain, even through the frustration, even through the discipline and the sacrifice, because you know this person knows what they're talking about, right?
Yes.
They made the plan, it works, let me just do it that way. And so that's how I looked at it when I was going through, you know, the early stages of submitting to a plan that wasn't my own, right?
Right.
Yeah, but it definitely, it changed my life too. And I'm so grateful to hear you say that just by sharing it, it changed your life too.
Yes, it did, because it's one thing to read about it, hear about it, you know, the people that are not, near you, it's not tangible right there.
Yeah.
When I saw your, what you put, the book, I read the book, Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. And and when I heard, when you explained you paid off these loans, this amount, and I'm like, you know, for years I was trying to get an understanding, because I wouldn't say I was good with money. I didn't have much to work with, you know, a single parent of 5 children, things like that, you know, but there was something in me that wanted to do better. You know, when you're good stewards with what God gives you, you have to be good stewards. He won't give you, he'll only give you what you'll be responsible with. He's not a wasteful God. So, and, you know, the Bible says my people perish for lack of knowledge. If you don't get the information, you'll kind of just sit there. And when I saw it, I said, oh my, and I reached out to you.
Yeah.
You know, like a lifeline. And when I got into the book, it is a discipline. It's just like if you change your eating habits, you know, change your lifestyle, Christianity, it requires, and you're right, the boundaries and saying no to yourself, also looking in the mirror and seeing that, you know, I think I got a problem here, you know, it's not easy to look at you. and then staying the course, you know. So I've been very blessed financially. I paid off my car, no more car note, bought a car cash, have an emergency fund. It works. I mean, maybe it doesn't necessarily mean this author and this book works for everyone, but you owe yourself that much to get the knowledge.
That's right.
And the fact that you share it is a blessing, because it needs to be shared. When we're given information, when you learn about the Lord, it's good news. We got to share it.
That's
like
right.
we wouldn't even be here with the liberties to do this if someone or something didn't happen that helped us recognize that we needed Jesus.
Right.
You know, so that's like amazing. And I'm grateful to you, and I'm continuing to grow in it. Now I'm sharing it with my kids. I've shared it with multiple people. I'm like, go get the book. I bought the book for somebody. You know? Yeah. So, you know, you can't get the book. I'll buy it for you. You know? So, and there is another area in your life that has, there's another area in your life that is amazing to me also. And you mentioned your mother a few times, and I've met your mother once. I didn't get to go to her event because remember I had fear of a bridge.
Bridges, I never forgot it. I prayed for you. I still pray for you when I think about that phobia.
I'm getting better. But, you know, and just seeing how her life has unfolded and how you've shared your mother. It's an amazing, she's a phenomenal woman of God. And I want you to tell us about your mother. I'm not going to botch up her name. I'm going to let you say her name.
Sophia L. Pottinger Hewitt.
Yes.
Phenomenal woman of God. Yes. You know, came into this world, Kingston born, immigrant, right? Came to this country at a young age, kind of built it up from nothing in that, you know, she just went after pursuits, right? She wanted to be better. She didn't want to be what she came from, right? She came from dirt road. She came from rape. She came from abuse. She came from teenage pregnancy. She came from abortion, right? All of these things that any believer might judge, let's be transparent, right? Might say, why are you qualified to do ... right? Fill in the blank. But God, when she was 42 years old, and this is something that occurred to me while mourning her death, it occurred to me after I lost her. Wow, my mom was 42 when she was saved, right? It just didn't even occur to me, because I remember I was 20, but it never occurred to me how old she was. And when I remember that versus when I compare it to all she accomplished in that 9 years belonging to Christ, it reminds me to be gracious and merciful with my friends and the strangers around me who I think should be somewhere that they're not yet in their faith, right? How dare I? Or us. I'm making it personal, so you guys don't think I'm talking about you, but I'm sure you can relate. There are people in our lives that we say, you don't understand this by now? We've been friends for so long. You're not following Jesus. You know, like, you put these expectations on people like you're God. Meanwhile, for my mom in particular, God's plan was in your 42nd year, after you have 4 children, 3 children with your husband, 1 child outside of the marriage, not her, you know, my dad, but after you have your children, after they grow up. I'm my mother's youngest, okay? So at 42 years old, her youngest was 20 years old in college. That's when she gave her life to Christ, right? And so in her 42nd year, she gives her life to Christ. And then about 3 years later, she starts doing women's empowerment events in her church. She had become the president of her women's ministry at a CME church in Connecticut at the time. She started doing the ministry there. Eventually, it broke out into a much bigger thing where she would rent out a hall, like a wedding hall, Aria Banquet Hall, it's called. Right. And her and her 3 friends and the friends' husbands, they would self-fund these empowerment events that was meant to uplift, edify, and encourage women, glorify God. And she did this by way of just reaching out to other churches by letter. I have some of them on letterhead, other churches, reaching out to people in supermarkets, in malls. I mean, this was like soldier on the ground, grassroots ministry, so to speak, right? Exactly. Building it up just from nothing, just because that was in her heart. People ask me when I tell them this and show them pictures all the time, because she did this for 5 years in a row before she passed away. And she literally, people would ask me, oh, wow, was your mom a social worker? And I said, no. And they said, oh, is she a pastor? I said, no. She a reverend? No. And it's a sad thing what we do, right? God literally gave the homeless man we walk past on the street multiple gifts, layered gifts. But because there's no title attached to it, we don't even expect that person to have gifts. Like, it's the strangest thing. We believers who know God, right? It's a strange thing that we do. We almost don't expect people to be anything other than what they look like or what they've been through, right?
Yes.
Whereas my mom had all of this in her, and over the course of being saved and just pursuing the things of God and kind of being obedient to what he put in her,
Right.
she was able to have so much impact in bringing people to Christ and exposing people to Christ and encouraging people and letting them know this is what God, the God you're not sure about, this is what he thinks of you. Yeah. And she would do this by not even just the empowerment events. My mom is very well known. Anybody who knows my mom would know this. She would text people every morning during her devotion time. She would take a time out of her morning. This is a woman that went to work every day. Okay. I don't know when she found time. And she had a list, and I have the list now. She would text people individualized encouragements based on what was happening in their lives. And to the extent she didn't know them, because she did this for strangers too, just people she would come across, exchange numbers, right? Just text encouragements to people, always with some kind of scripture. But it was, people would always say it hit. They looked forward to it. For years she did this. This was who she was, right? Like, this was just in her to do. Nobody asked her to do it. Nobody forced her to do it. She made a list. I have lists laminated, right? Like, this was important to her to get done, right? Every single morning. And then she created this book. I actually put it aside because I knew we were going to talk about this. Just this little book she created in 2017. Oh, wow. And sold it at the empowerment events. This is A Dose of Encouragement, which is what she called her ministry that she created. This is my mommy. So you guys can see her.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
And she literally just created this little book that includes a bunch of scriptures that helped her through some of the most difficult times of her life. Self-funded, okay? This is sold this face-to-face with people, gave me a bunch, gave my sister a bunch, aunties, uncles, just gave people books, said, okay, sell it, right? And we sold it for like $10 a pop. Ultimately, what happened is, I'll just show you, in this book, she's got Old Testament, and then it was supposed to say New Testament, right? But there's an error in the book. It says Old Testament all throughout for the scriptures that are old and new. And so what happened was, when she discovered that, because we didn't know, right? And she had paid the printer guy. I have a ton of these books in Connecticut still. And when we found that out, she just started giving them away for free. She didn't want to charge people for the error. She said, we're going to fix these next year at the empowerment event. We'll sell the new ones, but for now, just give them away, right? Her heart, long story short, just my mother's heart was always for people. Specifically, I think she was called to women because she had been through so much turmoil as a woman. She was subject to serial adultery in her marriage, so along her childhood, being abused and still being successful, still being well-spoken, still being confident speaker, all these things that, the world might say she should have never been, right? And then to have the nerve to have all of her children, African-American children from immigrant parents, all go to college and get degrees, the nerve, you know what I mean? Only God, only God's favor, right? On her life. And I want people, when people doubt my God, because my situation, my living situation is not nearly as bad as what hers was growing up, right? She is my antidote. Even till now in her death, to talk about how she endured, she was faithful unto death. I learned the meaning of that scripture watching my mom dwindle away from cancer, right? And how even in her deathbed and in her end, she was still glorifying God. She still was hopeful and faithful over us, her children, her family. She still had dreams and things that she needed us to know, right? To see her go through the worst pain of her life and still know who she belonged to, I feel like, despite, and I've said this to people, right now today, I am living my worst nightmare, right? I used to tear up at the thought of losing my mom. I mean, she could be sitting right in front of me. Right. And just thinking about the thought of losing her, it would make me cry, right? That's how much I love my mom. Yeah. And so for me to be living it now, in a strange way, as afraid as I feel sometimes, because it's like, man, I was 29 when I lost her. Next week, we'll make 1 year that we've lost her. She passed away December 4th, 2019. And when I think about how I've come this far and God has blessed me so much during this season, right? And it makes no sense because this is a season of mourning. It's the worst season of my life, the first year without my mom, right? Full year. But at the same time, he's been so gracious and just ensure that I know what he needs me to do. And so I'm trying to do it like Sophia and just do it, not question and just be obedient, right? Or question it and go anyway, because it's okay to question, but you got to go be moving and going. Don't just question and be still, right? If you heard it, he said it so you can do it, right? So, but no, she's a powerful woman. I'm grateful she was mine. I mean, it's an understatement. I love that she was mine and that I have her in me.
I'm very grateful that you share her too. You know, even now, your mother's ministry is continuing to touch the lives of people. And, you know, you see in her children the generosity to share her legacy. And while you speak of your mother, it reminds me, you said her ministry was a 7-year ministry.
Yeah.
7 years.
Yeah.
And it reminds me when Jesus had his ministry, it was a 3-year ministry. You know, we don't know how long we have.
Right.
So when we know, go and do it anyway. And if you're afraid, do it afraid, like Joyce Meyer says. Do it, you know, because there are people that are waiting, and there are people I've learned from your mother that's waiting after you're gone too. You know, so the legacy that you leave, and she left one. I mean, I've met your mother once. It was a few-minute conversation.
Yeah.
There was something about her, you know, and we share the same father. So she's my sister in faith, you know, and she's touched my life because there have been times when, you know, you're called to ministry. Everybody thinks you're not qualified. Everybody, because you don't do it this way. You don't do it their way. You know, the money's funny. You're raising kids. You know, the ministry is like, everybody's going to wonder why you know, you're not qualified, you know, and it's just, you can do it anyway. Like when you told me about your mother, and then to see her and see what she was doing, it's a motivation to keep going, you know. And I think everyone needs to understand that if you're called into ministry and you're doing it and it doesn't look like it's working or the money's not right, you'd be surprised how God will move on your behalf and after, you know. And I commend you and your siblings because you share your mother with us in so many ways. You're a blessing. I mean, you just, maybe you didn't know, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So you've been a blessing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So many ways. It's an inspiration to see you on Facebook. I get excited when I see what you're going to put up next, you know. And it doesn't matter how old someone is, we can all learn from each other, you know, and grow. And so my question to you, because I had like 1,000,001 questions, what would you leave with the viewers? Because there's a lot of people listening to you right now, and you've given them so much information, so much jewels. I call them jewels. What would you say to them that you could leave with them that would resonate on their spirit?
All right, so I'll start at a place and then I'll try to unpack it, right? If I could say one thing to anybody that could influence every area of their life, I would say that the Word of God, the Bible, is foundation, right? And what I mean by that is, you know, I think culture might say that the home is foundation, right? Your mom is foundation. Women are foundation. There are all these things that people want to be foundation. But ultimately, it is the one who created all of that, meaning he understands all of that. That is foundation. And so if you want to understand yourself the best way you can, you want to understand people the best way you can, if you want to understand what your purpose is, why am I even here on this planet, on this earth, in this state, in this town, whatever the case may be, the answer can be found through God's word, right? But in order to understand it, I mean, it won't happen overnight. You won't just open up the Bible and understand, and you can't get frustrated with that and decide he's not real, right? You can't blame the Bible for your lack of understanding, right? It's just like any other relationship. If you don't put in the work to get to know him, you won't know him. That's just it, right? He's there for you to know, by the way. It's unlike any other human relationship. God will never leave you. He will never walk away because you've decided not to know him.
Right.
He's watching you not know him, right? Just waiting for you to turn and engage, you know. And that's the blessing, is that whenever you're ready, so no pressure from me,
Right.
whenever you're ready, just know your answers are always going to be sitting in a Bible. And the beauty in 2020 is you don't need the physical Bible, right? You got one on every technology machine, iPad, phone, Bible app.
Exactly.
It's free. It's free. Google is free,
Yeah.
right? So anytime you want to know anything else about something else, do that too. If you want to know God, just do a Google search, you know.
Yes.
People might try to shame you for not having the physical Bible. I'm not going to do that. I think the word of God, let me tell you what, God is so powerful that he gave us who are born in this era, this electronic devices to access it. He gave us so many different ways to access them. We don't need a scroll anymore. We don't need stone anymore. We don't need word of mouth with nothing in writing. We have him everywhere if we want him, right? Yeah. So I encourage you all to just access God wherever you know to find him, whether it's a person you know who's a Christian who can point you at a place to start. But just know that the Bible is foundation. Start there, right? If all else, you know, if you don't know where else to start there. That's my little piece of a long-winded piece of advice.
So what is next, Karlesha?
Man, you know, for those of them out there that have lost someone, I think they would understand when I say it changes your perception of time on earth. It changes your perception of what you've got planned, right? And so for me, I genuinely and confidently say, I have no idea. What I do know is it's so important to me that if God took me next week, this time, I will have left a little bit of everything that he put in me to do. Amen. And so whatever is next, it will entail glorifying him by way of poetry, by way of lawyering, by way of being a friend, a sister, a Christian, in any arena and anything that I'm doing. Just know whatever's next, it's going to entail glorifying God with a boldness, you know, shamelessly, even in my flaws. You know, like I'm just going to be that person. So that's what's next. More of that.
And again, I am so grateful for your transparency, your honesty. You know, this ministry, this show is about helping people see Jesus for real.
Yeah.
You know, not the idea, but who he really is and how he really meets you where you are, not at your perfection, not at your flaws, just right here in that place. And I just thank you for sharing your story, you know, and I'm grateful that you continue to do what you do, helping people get to that place to understand the Lord and utilizing every gift that he's given you. You continue to shine and continue to lift that mantle of your mother and that legacy that continues to touch lives, because I, for one, have been completely touched. And whenever I'm in my uncertainty, I am reminded by her walk through her children.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful. She shared her life and you share yours as well. Thank you. And I thank everyone for joining the broadcast. I hope Karlesha's sharing of her life, her testimony, her transparency, her family will bless your life as well. Just continue to do what God has called you to do. And you can't go wrong because he's with you throughout the whole process. You have a blessed evening.
Thank you so much. You too.
One child, one family. Every situation, every day, it's God's way. Jesus meeting you at your will. 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 Jesus meeting you at your will.
Let's have the conversation.